Hi friends, I'm Jeffy G, coming to you with another episode, another show. In this one, I'm going to talk about something kind of interesting. I'm using my UAD Apollo X4 for live purposes. I never thought I'd be doing that. And one of the reasons I am is that I sold a mixing console back during COVID that I thought I would never use again because I just wasn't hosting rehearsals for any particular purpose. As it turns out, I'm back at it. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what's going on in the studio. I'll do a bit of a walk around, and then I'll go into the details of how I've got console for UAD set up with my Apollo 4, how I'm managing the inputs and plugins, and really there's some great concepts once you get your head behind the idea that you have a digital mixer and not the traditional analog mixer. Let me show you. Well, I haven't had the studio set up for rehearsal for years. It was all primarily set up with my gear for recording. So this just gives you sort of a scan of what everything looks like. It's a big enough room for a rehearsal, and I did use it that way many years ago. Down at the business end, I have a drum kit set up, and that belongs to a visiting drummer. And you can see over here, I've got my old school rolling keyboards all set up on a stand. And over to this side, I've got a David Eden bass amp. The bass player usually sits in this chair here. And there's two monitors back there. They're both wedged monitors, but they're passive. They don't have any power. Whereas today, most of the monitors you have are powered. Over to this side, I've got my keyboards. I use this Roland A33 because it has 73 keys, and I'm using MainStage on my computer over there. And this just gives me more keys to do layering and assign parts. I could also use this Novation launch key, 49, except 49 keys really isn't enough. And then way around the other side of the studio, we usually set up guitar players right here in the middle. We sit their amplifiers in that room behind. Just to give it a little bit of distance, you can crank up the amp a little bit more. These speakers to the side here are also passive. They're Klipsch La Scalas. I use those as well. Kind of interesting. I'm actually using 3 sets of speakers during rehearsal. And the Klipsch are powered by that power amp sitting on my desk there. It's an old Kenwood, but those speakers are 4 ohm, so that amp sounds super loud. So just taking a close look at the desk, there's my Apollo X4. I'm using all 4 inputs on that. The X4 has 3 outputs, and I'm going to go over how best to use those 3 outputs. And actually, in addition to those outputs, it's got 2 headphone outs. So you can have 2 separate mixes for headphones. And you could use those headphone outs to power speakers or have a signal fed to the speakers. There's some advantages to that. Okay, right behind it, I've got a small rack. I'm not actually using a lot of stuff on the rack for live. I often use the Motu 8 pre on the top, which is connected to the Apollo via ADAT. So it gives me another 8 channels if I wanted, for a total of 12. The Motu that's in the middle I'm not using. It's really old. It's Firewire. But I am using a power amp down at the bottom, and it's about 100 watts a side or 150 a side. It's not a lot. It's a solid state amp, and I'm using that to drive those passive monitors. In addition to the Klipsch and this one, I've also got the regular studio monitors sitting here at my desk, which are Atom Audio T7Bs. And then below my desk, well hidden, is a sub, also Atom Audio. I found turning it on for the live performance was pretty good, so I turn on the sub. So here's a quick view of my typical studio setup using the UA console. These are my 4 inputs for the X4. They're generally assigned to microphones or instruments. I use the Pure Plate Reverb and the Galaxy Echo as 2 auxiliary sends. And then I have some virtual channels on here. Some of them are coming from that Motu 8 pre, and some of them are truly virtual. So I generally use the Motu 8 pre for all my keyboards. I don't really use it for microphones because you can't use the Unison preamps on that via ADAT. If I'm going to record anything acoustically or vocals, I want to get the best possible sound, so I tend to go directly into the Apollo X4. When I was looking at this for live performance, I thought, okay, how much of this do I want to keep and how much do I want to change? Well, one of the things that I quite like is that I've got system audio coming through this virtual channel. And that's really great because if you're playing a song, but you can see it comes through here, so I can control the volume. I control the volume of all my system audio, which is really excellent. The other thing I have here is my DAW, which can also be assigned to virtual channels. Pull up a song here in Logic. And you can see here, it's coming through this virtual channel for the DAW 3 and 4. If you've never set that up before, I would strongly encourage it. Logic Pro, Settings, Audio. If you go to the Audio tab, on the I/O assignments, you can see I've assigned the main stereo output to virtual 3 and 4. And that's what causes all the output from Logic to show up in the console. Again, just a really great way to monitor things and have a little bit more control over your playback. But for live performance, I'm using MainStage. And I'm using all the instruments from MainStage. Lots of them are the Logic instruments, but I also use third-party instruments. Oh, yeah. If you look at MainStage, it's coming directly through my system without going through the UAD console. That's unfortunate. So I play it, but you don't see anything showing up in here. So there's no easy way to control things. It doesn't have the same option under settings to assign it to a virtual channel. Too bad, because that'd be great. All right, here we are looking at my live setup, not my studio setup. And you might wonder, well, what's the difference? And the big difference is primarily managing the outputs and the cue mixes. Okay, and you can even hear that I've got my microphone sending output to cue mix to auxiliary 1 and 2. 2 is the delay, check 1, 2, right? So I can control the delay and the reverb for each microphone I'm using for the live performance. And actually, what goes to cue mix 1 and 2 are the headphone mixes, and what goes to 3 and 4 are those alternative output pairs at the back of the X4. And here's the important lesson, is that by default, either nothing comes out of those output pairs, or you can use a feature that's built into the X4, and that is the alternate outputs. You'll see this alt count. And what this is designed to do is to allow you to have up to 3 different monitors, but it's all aimed at recording. So, you have your primary monitors and some big monitors and some small monitors, and you want to be able to switch between those monitor pairs using your Apollo X4 and using the big knob on there and the dials that are on there. And so you set this to 1 or 2. By default, it is set to 0. 1 would mean you have, ironically, 2 output pairs, and 3 would be 3 output pairs. The limitation of this alt out is that only 1 output pair can be heard at a time. Now think about that. And it kind of makes sense for the studio in that you only want to be hearing 1 pair of monitors at a time. But for live, I want to hear all 3 at the same time. I want the mix to go to any of the 3, and I want them all to be heard at the same time. So for that to work, I found out this has to be set to 0. Okay, now how do you get output routed to those alternate outputs on the back of your Apollo X4? And you do that through the cue mix options. So you'll see here, cue mix 1 and 2 are going to headphone 1 and 2, and you can decide whether it's the mix or an individual cue mix. If your vocalist wants to hear a different mix out of one set of headphones than the rest of the band, you can do that. And then 3 is line 1 and 2. These are the alternate output pairs on the back. and 4 is 3 and 4. So there's your 3 output pairs, the mains, line 1 and 2, and line 3 and 4. That's the way they are labeled. Actually, you could relabel them if you want in the settings. I just kept them the way they come as a default. Let me show you how that would work, is that on any given mic, I can control how much of this particular mic goes to my desktop monitors, which is QMix 1, my Klipsch monitors, which I showed you in the walk around, and how much goes to those wedge monitors, those live wedge monitors, which goes through that power amp that's sitting on my rack. So I got potentially, I can route any microphone or any instrument to any of those output pairs. And I use that. For example, on the E-drums, I don't want any of the E-drums coming out of those Klipsch La Scala monitors. I'm just too paranoid that E-drums could blow them up. So QMix 3 here goes to those wedge monitors, which are quite robust and designed more for what you hear on stage. And if I want to hear a little bit of the E-drums through my desktop monitors, I can control that here. And I don't have any reverb or delay set. So you can basically play around with the mix for each individual person, which is pretty cool, really. The other thing you should know is this mute button only works on the mains. It doesn't mute the alternate output pairs. Okay, I take that back. That's not quite accurate. That is true. It does not mute the alternate output pairs on the back of the X4, but it does mute the headphones. So headphones and the mains are receptive to mute. So what do you do if you've got singer on a live performance and you're getting a bit of feedback through some of those alternate output pairs? Well, fortunately, the power amps that drive those speakers also have mute buttons on them. So in a panic, I can just lower the volume or hit the mute button on those things. But the only way to control the entire mix that's going to those alternate output pairs, in my case, is the amps that the sound is traveling through. So those are important lessons learned if you're going to use this as your digital mixer. And really, it's getting your head around the fact that everything you used to do on an analog mixer is somewhere here, all your routing capabilities. In fact, it's more flexible and has more capabilities. The other advantage you have is that on any given channel, you've got plugins. So you've got EQ, and there's a variety of EQs. I like to use this one for live. It's pretty simple. The thing to keep in mind is that I'm not using condenser microphones for live. Everybody in my rehearsal space is typically using a Shure SM58 dynamic microphone. And where that comes into play is whether you want to use these Unison-enabled channel strips. So let's just take a look at a basic one here. Here's the always reliable Universal Audio 610B. And this is a very simple, great channel strip for recording. But for live, it really isn't going to make any difference. In fact, it may just get in your way because the color that it adds really gets lost through all of these different output pairs. The studio wedge monitors you have on stage, the mains that you're using, you're not really going to be hearing the attributes of a channel strip. So while initially I had this set up with channel strips, I ended up turning them all off. They affect the output gain, partly because we're using SM58s. So you end up having to really crank up the level on these things. Now make no mistake, for recording purposes, I would never record without one of these. In fact, these are just, wonderful tools. Like you've got compressors like the LA2As and 3As or 1176s, and you can put these all into your signal chain if you want. But I tried to keep it simple. And then I decided that some of these old friends of mine that come over to jam can't sing in tune. So I fired up auto-tune, and it works really well in a live setting. I could turn that on for each and every person. And I have it set to chromatic mode, so I don't have to go in here and enter the key. Introducing some unique sounds into your live performance, you have all kinds of plugins that you might own or want to use. Compressors and some modulation features like chorus and de-esser. You can put these all into your chain, and That's something that you cannot do with a traditional analog mixer unless you bought all of these things as outboard effects, in which case you're taking a whole rack of effects with you. It's really convenient to have these all built in. So once you've got this set up the way you like it, one of the features I like is you can save that configuration and say, hey, for this band playing live, this is how everything's going to be set up. You can even have different setups for different songs or different sets. And it's pretty easy from the menu up here to just quickly load another whole mix. A band that starts off with 4 people, then you have a guest that comes up. Maybe you want to have a different mix for that guest. Or if you've got backup singers that come in partway through your set, or even brass players, a sax and a trumpet, show up for set number 2, you could just save those all as different configurations. So lots of flexibility, all the advantages. I haven't run into too many limitations with console. The real question is whether you want to pack that up from your studio and take it with you. So I bought a box, looks like this, and it's just a foam box that fits the Apollo X4 perfectly. Everything else is on my laptop, so I would basically just take my laptop and the X4, and I'm good to go. I guess one of the questions that went through my mind was, I'm using this for rehearsal, but would I use it for a live gig? Well, it's a bit of overkill for a live gig. A lot of times playing a live show, you'd probably be better off with a small mixer, maybe a digital mixer. Personas has those Studio Live mixers at pretty low cost, and you could rent one of those. But maybe I would. Maybe I would take the X4 with me, set it up, have all my settings and presets ready to go. You're always relying on your computer to be an available mixer. And I think that's probably the concern that a lot of people have is that a reliable setup? Now for me, I'm using MainStage on my MacBook, and it's a pretty new M1 Max MacBook, so it's fairly reliable. So I'm kind of dead in the water anyway if my MacBook fails, since I'm using all the sounds from Logic and third-party instruments through MainStage. So in the big scheme of things, I really can't afford to not have my MacBook working. If you found this video helpful or interesting, then you should subscribe. Now, there's lots of reasons you wouldn't subscribe. Maybe the content around music production and iOS and AI, maybe these subjects don't interest you, and if that's your position, that's okay. That's cool. But it would certainly help me out if you do subscribe and click on the like button and provide a comment. Let me know what you think about this content, if you agree or disagree. I welcome that kind of a debate and that discussion. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.